and welcome to this podcast for the University of Alabama at Birmingham's CounterACT Research Center of Excellence in Arsenicals. My name is Mina Nabavi, and I'm a program manager in the UAB School of Public Health. Today on the podcast, we are joined by Dr. Ziad Kazi, Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine at Emory University and consultant with the UAB CounterACT Center, and Dr. Andrew Nelson, Senior Member of the Technical Staff in the Global Chemical and Biological Security Group at Sandia National Laboratories. Dr. Nelson joined Sandia National Laboratories in September of 2016, where he has focused on improving global chemical safety and security. He currently leads projects on chemical security in Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. He is currently leading a number of writing projects for chemical security handbooks and international guidelines, and recently served as a guest editor for the American Chemical Society Journal of Chemical Education. Dr. Nelson is a speaker for a Grand Round seminar series as part of the UAB CounterACT Research Center of Excellence in Arsenicals, and was recording this podcast with Dr. Kazi.
Dr. Nelson, thank you so much for being with us today.
It is such a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, you and I have met several years ago, and I have to admit, when I first met you, I did not know what Sandia National Laboratories were and what was their mission and what was the scope of their activities. Can you potentially describe that briefly for us, for our audience today?
Absolutely. So Sandia National Laboratories is a large, what's called federally funded research and development center. So we're a federally funded research laboratory and development laboratory that formed actually out of the Manhattan Project in the 1940s. And since our time in the 1940s, we've grown to be a large multi-mission laboratory working in a lot of different topics that support national security, ranging from, of course, nuclear deterrence. We also focus on energy, so solar power, battery production, algae fuel. And then we also have a very large area focused on non-proliferation. So chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive non-proliferation. Some people call this SBIRNI. And we really are working in support of a lot of other international missions and US missions to promote peace, safety, security, and stability around the world.
Wow, that's a pretty broad range of projects and activities that you cover. Now, I do note that you are within another specific group, correct? The Chemical Biological Security Group. Can you talk to us more about that specific group that
Absolutely.
you are part of?
So our Chemical and Biological Security Group is housed within our Center for Global Security and Cooperation. So within this center, we have over 100 scientists and engineers working in a number of non-proliferation efforts, primarily internationally facing. Now, within the Chemical and Biological Security Group, we focus specifically on chemical weapons and biological weapons, non-proliferation technologies and efforts. So we are constantly working with scientists, governments, international organizations, and individuals all around the world, really to collectively and collaboratively secure chemicals and biological agents so that they cannot be used as weapons.
Well, yeah, that's certainly an area that I have interest in as well. I look at this area from the medical and public health perspective with my role as a medical toxicologist. And it's really a pleasure to see you speaking at our research center, our Arsenicals at UAB, to our Grand Round series, because I really think it's relevant to raise awareness about these important topics amongst laboratorians, basic and clinical scientists, as well as healthcare providers. For example, when I first met you, I honestly could not differentiate between chemical security and chemical safety. And I know that's a very important part of your presentation this week to our Grand Round series. Can you share briefly with our audience the difference between chemical safety and chemical security? Because I think many people tend to confound these two definitions.
Absolutely. And we find that chemical safety and chemical security are confused in many parts of the world. And actually in some languages, safety and security are the same word. And even within English, if you look up safety and security in the dictionary, you can find that there are some confusing and conflicting definitions. So it's something that's worth really narrowly defining. When we speak of chemical safety, we're specifically referring to protecting people from chemicals. So that's the act of protecting people from accidental or unintentional releases of energy or toxic properties of chemicals. And this is something that comes into our laboratory practices, and we're probably all quite familiar with it, at least at some level. The act of putting on gloves, so PPE, personal protective equipment, or working in a fume hood, what we call engineering controls, or following a standard operating procedure, so an SOP. These are all practices that we do and controls that we implement in the laboratory to keep us safe. Chemical security, on the other hand, is the act of protecting chemicals from people. So this is really moving more into this idea of intentional and malicious use of chemicals. And chemical security is the collective action trying to prevent people from maliciously using chemicals. So in the laboratory, some of these measures can look the same. For instance, storing chemicals in lock boxes. This is a security approach, and it also can help safety. And but there's some other areas of security that don't really touch on safety, such as having security guards on campus. They can really help improve security, but they may not play a direct role in safety. So again, to kind of distinguish them, safety is the practice of protecting people from accidental releases of chemicals or energy from those chemicals. And chemical security is the acts and the process of protecting chemicals from people so that those chemicals cannot be intentionally and maliciously used in the form of, say, weapons, explosives, or in some cases being sold in the black market, or in other cases being used to make illicit drugs. So that's how I think of chemical safety and security.
Well said and well described, and thank you again for reminding us of these important distinctions, which really I think are very relevant to our webinar series and very relevant to our UAB Center for Excellence for Research on Arsenicals. Since we are conducting cutting-edge science research in our laboratories, following the highest standards for chemical safety and chemical security are of paramount importance. Now, when you think about chemical security and the way you described it, you're thinking a lot about, as you mentioned, malicious intent and terrorist intent or threats. Now, how is this relevant to our listeners who are considering listening to the webinar? If they are healthcare providers, say they are first responders, firefighter, paramedic, say they're a medical student, or say they are a postdoctoral fellow doing research at UAB?
That's an excellent question. The issues of safety and security are really what we call low probability, high consequence events. And we can give many case studies on safety where there were accidents that happened that were never predicted because they were such low probability, no one really worried about it. For instance, at Texas Tech University, there was a case of a student that scaled up a small amount of explosives. And this resulted in an explosion that resulted in him losing some body parts. And this is something that was never really that big of a concern because it was such a low likelihood event until it happened finally. Now it's a high consequence event. There were federal investigations, and there were many different corrective actions that came out of that. So it was a very expensive result from something that could have been prevented through various other approaches. The same is true in security. Here in the United States, we're lucky to not have a large chemical security terrorism problem. Along with that, we have this very relaxed culture and very open laboratories, and that could result in making it quite easy for someone to walk in off the street and find chemicals and use them for either the production of weapons, and certainly there are a lot of cases where explosives have been created from chemicals taken from the university. We find, at least I find myself, often falling into this mindset of thinking of threats coming externally. So someone's coming off the street, an outsider, someone we don't know, coming inside and stealing something to make a weapon. Whereas in reality, there's probably more likely a threat of an insider. So someone that works in the university, could be a student, could be a lab tech, who might just take chemicals one day. And the challenge with that is that they understand the processes, they understand the security nature, and know how to get away with it. And this is a problem we face in academic laboratories with people stealing equipment. Certainly there's a lot of cases of people stealing for illicit drug precursors or equipment to make illicit drugs. And then also from a medical perspective, you have access to a number of different opioids and various other pharmaceutical drugs that could be used certainly for drugs of recreation, but also could be used for drugs of abuse and potentially as weaponizable agents. So it's a really hard problem for our brains to comprehend because it is such a low likelihood reality. But if a chemical security breach were to happen, it would certainly make national, if not international news. So the consequence of it happening would be quite large to a university or to some sort of a medical training program.
Absolutely, and as you know, you and I have been discussing this for a few years, and we were interested in looking as well at the role of healthcare providers in chemical security, acting as sentinels for these potential breaches. Would you like to maybe comment on that briefly?
Yeah, this is an interesting idea that Dr. Kazi and I have been exploring more, that the medical community has an interesting connection to the community where particularly first responders and emergency medical EMTs can go out into the community and they can see when there's some sort of a security breach happening out in the environment. The reason that they have this extra insight is that chemicals that are used for potentially explosives or making weapons, or even for illicit drug production, are inherently dangerous. And in the process, people might injure themselves, might injure someone else. And then if an emergency EMT were to arrive on site, they could then start to notice, hey, something's not right here. And then start to report information like that to the appropriate authorities. But certainly this is a topic that starts to balance on the idea of patient privacy versus national security. So it's a kind of a tough topic.
Agreed. And I was going to say that this also extends a little bit to the emergency department, where we often see victims of an injury and collect some information about the incident, and sometimes it doesn't add up. And being alert and having awareness about these potential chemical security threats or breaches, I think helps us be better physicians and better members of our community. And Dr. Nelson, I really want to thank you for your time and expertise. I want to thank Sandia National Laboratories as well.
Thanks, Dr. Kazi. We're honored to serve our nation.
Thank you for listening. Please tune in next time for another episode from the UAB CounterACT Research Center of Excellence in Arsenicals.